is it possible to have a future without any food allergies? I'm food scientist Abbey, and today I have a special guest, Professor Kasper Hettinga, who works with milk proteins and how they elicit an allergic response. Hi, Kasper.
Hi, Abbey. So nice to be here.
I'm very excited for you to be here to pick your brain about food allergies and food allergies in the future. But first, I wanted to ask, do you have a food allergy or anyone in your family?
No, luckily neither me nor any of my family members suffer from a food allergy.
So I had the same thing growing up. I didn't have a food allergy. No one in my immediate family did. But when I got to college, actually my roommate, all 4 years of college, she had a really bad peanut allergy. And that is where I got a very good look at the risks of having a food allergy.
And especially a peanut allergy is known to be a relatively severe one compared to other allergens, which can really lead to life-threatening symptoms indeed.
Yes, I remember one of the first conversations my roommate and I had on the day we met, the first day of college, was her being like, here's my EpiPen, here's where I store both of them, and here's how you use it. And that was very eye-opening for me.
So if you look at different food allergies, also the symptoms differ a lot. So you have relative mild allergies where you do develop a rash or something like that. But it's not life-threatening, whereas, for example, with peanut allergies, but also some other allergies, they can really lead to anaphylaxis, which is life-threatening and indeed require an EpiPen as an immediate treatment to at least reduce the symptoms to a level where they are no longer life-threatening.
Right. And say for my friend who has the peanut allergy or anyone else with a food allergy, how do they become allergic in the first place?
Almost all the foods that we eat contain proteins. And these proteins in our body should be harmless molecules. They are broken down. Our body uses them as a nutrient source. But in some cases, the immune system develops a response as if it was something that is harmful. And that happens upon consumption of a food, and you develop this response. But only then upon the next consumption, then you really get the allergic symptoms. So only after repeated consumption of the allergen, you get the allergic symptoms.
Right, and I think that last part is one that confuses a lot of people because they say, well, the first time, I ate peanuts, I didn't have a response, but you'll never get an allergic response the first time you eat an allergen. It's always the second or third time, like something like that.
Exactly. So it's always upon repeated exposure, and some people develop it already after coming in contact with an allergen 2 times, whereas other people have been eating something for actually quite a long time, but then at some point they do develop an allergy.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. And I was actually just explaining this to my older sister who has a 1-year-old, and I showed you the picture. My nephew woke up and his skin just had a rash all over his little body. And I asked my sister, did you feed him something for maybe the second or third time? It's not the first time, if he had this food, it's really after the first time, but she couldn't exactly pinpoint what it was.
And one of the difficulties with pinpointing that is also that a lot of food proteins are also used as an ingredient in other foods. So you are not always aware which proteins are being consumed. So even though something may be the second or the third time a child eats something, but the parent is not aware that it's already a repeated exposure to the allergen.
I think so, and that's basically what the doctor told her as well. It's going to be really hard to see specifically what food it is, but if it happens again in the future, then maybe we can get a better idea.
And it's known that especially in young children, the immune system is still developing, and it's not that easy that you can say, if we find this in the blood, for example, we know the baby has this specific allergy. So it's not that easy to really diagnose, and the younger you are, the more difficult it is to diagnose.
Okay. But a food allergy, in essence, if we had to define it, the person is really allergic to just the protein in the food?
Yeah, and it's some foods, like for example milk, contain a lot of proteins, and it can be that someone is only allergic to one specific protein in the milk, but it's always only to the protein. because to other food components you can be intolerant, like for example a lactose intolerance, but if it's a real allergy, it's always against a protein.
Right, and are they allergic to the whole protein, or what triggers the immune system, I guess?
Yeah, so if you look at food proteins, they are like a ball of wool or something like that, and that has a very specific shape. And then the immune system recognizes something on that shape. So it's even not the whole protein that's necessarily recognized. It's one part of the surface of the protein that is recognized by the immune system, and then it elicits this immune response to the protein. Although on one hand it could be that only one protein, one specific part of one protein is leading to an immune response. In a lot of cases, a child, for example, that develops a cow's milk allergy is responding to multiple parts or multiple proteins. So then taking out a single protein would not be enough to prevent problems.
Yeah, I see. But there also seems to be just a couple foods that are responsible for most allergies, right?
Yes, that's the case. And one of the reasons is that a lot of proteins are very easily broken down during digestion. And then also this part, for example, on the surface that it would be recognized by the immune system is already broken down during digestion before it's coming in contact with the immune system, whereas other proteins are more resistant against digestion, and then they remain in their intact form for a longer time and can then keep on eliciting this immune response.
I see. So it's almost structural differences within proteins too. Yes.
And then the peanut allergy is actually an interesting one, that the roasting of the peanut leads to the change of the protein. So then the surface of the protein changes due to the roasting process, and that is actually what the immune system is recognizing at that point. So someone who is allergic to peanuts may not have an allergic response if they would consume a bit of raw peanut, but it's really this roasting process leading to a structural change in the protein. And then this roasted protein is actually the thing that gets recognized by the immune system.
That is crazy. Interesting. And I know my friend who is allergic to peanuts, one time she accidentally ate potato chips baked or fried in peanut oil, and she went to the hospital because she was afraid it would trigger her allergy. But they said there was such little, it's oil. There's not, any protein, maybe a small amount, that she eventually left there like no reaction is going to happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, it depends on food processing, what in the end ends up in the product and whether that's enough and also in the right shape, you could say, of the protein to elicit this immune response.
Yes, and I want to talk a little bit about your specialty because you really study milk proteins and how people get allergic to milk proteins. Is there a reason that this specific allergy is important to study?
Yeah, cow's milk allergy is something that often develops already very early in life. And if you look at a newborn baby, if they are not breastfed and they get infant formula, then bovine milk formula is the main alternative. But in the first months of life, it's also the only food they are consuming. So if you develop an allergy against cow's milk protein very early in life, you immediately have a problem because your only food that you are consuming is then no longer tolerated anymore. Whereas if you are an adult and you are cow's milk allergic, you have enough alternatives to eat. But there's a second reason that cow's milk allergy is interesting, because there's the idea, what's called the atopic march, which means that once a child develops an allergy, more allergies may develop later in life, including also allergic diseases like asthma. So even though most children who have a cow's milk allergy grow over the allergy, because if it develops, they are usually between 6 months and 1 year old. When they are 3-4 years old, usually they develop naturally tolerance. But these children are more prone to develop further allergies. So the idea is if we can prevent the initial occurrence of the cow's milk allergy, we may also prevent allergies to develop later in life.
That's interesting. So the milk allergy that they outgrow is good, but it kind of triggers like a whole slew of events down their life, unfortunately.
Yeah, although that's something that you see epidemiologically if you follow these children, but how it exactly works is still unclear.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so I want to get into some of our ideas of how to get a future without any allergies. And I know you have a lot of good things to talk about. So I was thinking, let's start with like the most mild options first. Like what are some simpler ways we could get to this future?
Yeah, so we already talked about this structure of the protein being very important to the development of the allergy. So that also means if you destroy the structure, the immune system would not develop an allergic response anymore. So one of the things that can be done to milk proteins is heating them to such a high temperature, for example, as part of a baked product like a muffin or a pizza, where temperatures go up so much that you are structurally changing the allergen in a way that it doesn't elicit an immune response anymore. So this is sometimes called baked milk. So that's milk protein as part of a baked product. And on one hand, children can often tolerate these products, even though they are cow's milk allergic. But there are also indications that children who can tolerate this baked milk also outgrow subsequently the cow's milk allergy faster. So in this way, by just tuning the process of making the dairy product, you can also impact the allergic response. But there is also a much more simple at-home example, which is allergy to apples, because apples do contain an allergen as well, and that is very heat sensitive. So if you put an apple very briefly in a microwave, then this microwaving is already enough to destroy the structure of the allergen, and it doesn't work for everyone. So always be careful with trying these things. So I never recommend you to just eat things after you have heated them yourself. But in a lot of cases, people are able to consume apple, for example, after this microwave treatment.
So basically both of these, the baked milk and the apple, we can use heat is what's changing the protein, and really it just needs to alter like the part that is recognized by the immune system.
Exactly. So if you structurally change the protein, even though it doesn't fall apart or anything, it's still, the protein is still there, but just the structure is different. That may already be enough to prevent the immune system to give an allergic response.
And is it only, so food can be processed in a lot of different ways. Is it mainly heat that we can use to alter the protein? Are there other, like, can you use pressure or some other processing?
Yeah, so in principle there are multiple processes that can change the structure of a protein, like high pressure processing, which you just mentioned, is also a technique that will change the structure of the protein. But another often used process is cutting up the protein. So you can add enzymes during the process, and that is like scissors cutting up the protein. So then this ball of protein is just falling apart in fragments, and these fragments no longer elicit an immune response. So if we look at cow's milk allergic children, the first treatment option is to give what's called a hydrolyzed infant formula. And in those products, something has been added, this enzyme, to cleave up the allergen, so that the immune system hopefully does not respond to the protein anymore.
Right. And so this is a special infant formula only for babies that have allergy problems?
Exactly.
Okay, I actually saw a very funny, not funny, a YouTube video, so this is why you can't believe everything on the internet, and someone was going through the infant formula aisle and pointed out, like, why is hydrolyzed milk protein in it? Like, why can't they just put milk in our babies' foods, when actually, and already a food scientist had commented on this video, being like, it's actually to protect the babies, it's for like their own health and safety. So yeah, I found that very interesting.
And there are multiple reasons to break up the milk protein in infant formula. So you also have to be careful that not all hydrolyzed infant formulas are safe for cow's milk allergic children, because some are only hydrolyzed to such a small extent that, for example, stomach cramps are prevented. but the protein still contains the segments that can be recognized by the immune system. So you really need to talk to your doctor and know really which formula you should give to your baby, and not just buying any hydrolyzed formula.
Yes, so actually understand what each ingredient is, or what each formula is very important. But I know actually a project at Wageningen University and Research that was looking at reducing allergenicity in another more mild way had to do with a specific breed of apples, I want to say.
No, so in principle, the allergen is a product of the DNA of the species making the food. So if you look at a cow, the cow's DNA tells the cow how to make the proteins. But naturally, especially in plants, you often see different cultivars, different breeds that differ in their genetic code. So then by smart breeding of species, you can try to find, let's say, parent plants that are lacking the DNA code to produce the allergen. So that's the example of the apple allergen. Then you just breed with a specific apple cultivar that is lacking this piece of DNA that is telling the plant to make the allergen. And in this way you can make new apple plants that do not produce the allergen. So then instead of destroying the allergen, you already don't have it from the start and have a more safe product, so to say, an hyperallergenic product, without having to do anything different in the processing of the product.
Okay, so just by doing, I don't know, certain crossbreedings until that one gene is sort of outbred, then you have, an allergy-free apple.
But it's, for the apple it works, but if you look, for example, at cows, the production of the allergens is also part of just the whole synthesis process of milk. So if you would try to breed a cow which are lacking the genes for the allergens, they would not produce milk at all anymore. So it's not as easy to just say, we just breed out all the allergens in all the food products that we consume, because for a lot of allergens, they are proteins that are so crucial to the production of the food in the first place that you cannot just cross it out easily.
Right, so apple is a bit of a special case, or one of the cases like this where that gene could be outbred and there's no other sort of weird things happening down the line with getting rid of that gene.
Exactly.
No. Okay, so these were some more mild versions. Are there any ideas how to get rid of food allergies that maybe are more extreme or more novel that come to mind?
So if you look at the DNA that I just mentioned, that is describing the amino acids of the protein, and then during folding the structure develops, and then the structure is recognized. But in a lot of food allergies, we do know exactly which part of the structure is recognized, and then we also know which part of the DNA is responsible for that. So instead of just removing the gene by breeding, which often leads to problems, as I just mentioned, you could also try to only modify the small part of the gene that is responsible for the structure on the protein that is recognized by the immune system. So in this way, you are not breeding without the allergen, you are just structurally changing the allergen in a way that it's not eliciting an immune response anymore. So you have, it's called the CRISPR-Cas, which is like a gene editing tool that is becoming very popular to change DNA in a much wider range of applications. But this could be one application where you try to remove specifically that part of the protein that is recognized by the immune system.
Yes, I know of CRISPR because I don't know if it's really used in food or food allergies yet, but I feel like with diseases where they can pinpoint, one specific gene, they can use CRISPR almost like a scissors, like a very specific scissors, would you say, to cut out sort of the part that is causing the disease or the symptoms. So you're saying the same, because with food allergies, we have a protein, only a small part of it, elicits the immune response. We could do a similar thing with CRISPR.
Exactly. The only question is then, of course, what will happen in future, because you could look at what an allergic person now responds to and then try to remove that. But if you change part of the structure, then if people start eating this novel protein, you never know whether that is going to elicit a new immune response. So it could be that people just get allergic to this novel structure. So it's not that straightforward that you can just assume that if we take out the bad part of the gene or we replace it by something else, that it will be much easier to prevent an allergy, because new allergies could also develop against this novel structure. But as part of that, I already mentioned at the start that digestion also plays a role, because during digestion a protein is broken down, and as soon as it's broken down in small parts, it cannot elicit an allergic symptoms anymore. So one thing you could do is that if you are changing the structure of the protein by this CRISPR-Cas, that you are also adding something that makes it easier to digest. And in this way you could also cleave the protein more easily during digestion, and in this way also try to prevent novel allergies to start recognizing this novel structure on the outside of the changed protein.
Okay, so this is interesting. So you're saying if we have our long protein that we eat, we wouldn't get an allergic response if our, say, our digestive enzymes or the acid in our stomach, it's able itself to sort of cleave that protein more easily?
Exactly, because the immune system only recognizes a larger part of the structure. So if the protein is cleaved in peptides, that are the breakdown products that are formed during digestion, if these peptides are small enough, they can never elicit an immune response anymore, because they are just too small to bind to the immune system that is in the end leading to the allergic symptoms.
And do we know, like, what could we do to a protein to have it be more easily, like, chopped into pieces? Do we have any ideas?
Now, if we look, for example, at the stomach, there is one specific enzyme that helps in digesting proteins. And we know exactly between which amino acids it likes to cleave. So if we are changing the structure of the protein around the part that is recognized by the immune system, and we put in more amino acids that are recognized by this enzyme, we can stimulate more cleavage of this part, and thereby hopefully also prevent the development of allergies.
Right, so theoretically, we already know what enzymes we have in our digestive tract. We would just have to think, like, where do they preferentially chop up these proteins? Make sure that is present in these proteins, and then allergen, no response. No, this is very cool. But so CRISPR-Cas, which is probably a very novel idea. I don't know if it's used in foods or is allowed to be used in foods.
Not yet.
Yes. But basically there are two general ideas to reduce allergenicity. One, like you said, is modify some of the amino acids, and the other is make sure they're easily digested or chopped up. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes, And for the modifications, is there any idea of how you have to modify an amino acid? Like, how different do you have to make these things?
Yeah, no one knows.
Okay.
I mean, this technology is not yet used in practice, so it are just ideas how you could develop something like this, but until it's used in real life, we don't really know how many changes we have to do to prevent the immune response.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned a couple times, the difficult thing is if you change one thing, you don't know the effects necessarily down the stream.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing we know, for example, with milk, is that if you're allergic to cow's milk, you will often also have an allergic response to goat milk. So 90% has a cross-reactivity. So even though the protein is slightly different, the structure is still similar enough that the immune system recognizes it. So at least we do know that small changes will probably not be enough, because the structure will be still too similar and will still lead to an allergic response.
Okay, so we need to make sure, there is a big enough change to have the effect we want.
Exactly.
Okay, so Kasper, do you think we are moving towards this future without food allergens, or what is your outlook right now?
I think the steps of processing foods in a way that they don't elicit an allergic response are more easy to implement.
Yes.
And I think also from a consumer acceptance perspective will be easier to implement. Whereas with CRISPR-Cas, theoretically you could make much bigger steps where you don't only reduce allergenicity but would theoretically be able to completely get rid of it. But whether consumers are willing to buy products that are genetically modified in this way, may actually be quite challenging, especially to give it to your young child. I can imagine that parents would not be very happy to be the first ones to try this out.
Right, and I think in that case with CRISPR-Cas and food, there will be a lot of work to do with regulations and food law before we ever see that happen.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, no. Kasper, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm very happy to have been here. It's a topic that's close to my heart, so I'm happy to talk about this with you.
Wonderful, thank you. And if you're at home, maybe you will be working on the next steps towards this future without any food allergies. In the next episode, we'll talk about another question around food science, and I hope to see you then.